Sarah's breath tightens as she stands across from Olivia, the baby now completely still in her arms, the restaurant frozen in a silence so deep it feels unnatural, like the entire space has been pulled into one shared moment of suspended time, and Olivia does not move, her eyes locked on the child's wrist as if something invisible has just surfaced beneath the skin of reality. The soft glow of the chandelier above reflecting in her widened gaze while every conversation around them has fully died, forks resting midair, glasses untouched, staff motionless behind the counters, and James Carter slowly stepping closer as if afraid even sound might break something already fragile. Sarah shifts her weight slightly, holding the baby tighter against her chest, her voice low and cautious as she tries to anchor herself in the situation, but Olivia still does not respond immediately, her focus narrowing further onto a small detail on the child's wrist that seems to pull her deeper into a memory she cannot fully access. Her hand rises slightly then falls again as if she is testing whether what she sees is real, and for a moment she looks less like the owner of a high-end restaurant and more like someone standing at the edge of something long buried. James clears his throat softly, trying to regain control of the room, but Olivia raises a single hand without turning toward him, stopping him instantly. Her authority sharp without a single word, Sarah's eyes flick between them. Confusion growing as she tries to understand why this stranger is reacting so intensely to her child. The baby shifts slightly in her arms but remains calm, his gaze still fixed on Olivia in a way that feels almost deliberate, almost familiar, and Olivia takes a slow step forward again, closing the distance until she is only a few feet away, her breathing uneven now as she studies the child's face more closely, searching for something she cannot yet name. The restaurant feels smaller now, as if the walls themselves are leaning inward to witness what is happening. James whispers under his breath that they should clear the floor, but no one listens anymore because Olivia has completely detached from the room's control and entered something else entirely. Sarah instinctively takes a half step back, her protective grip tightening as uncertainty sharpens into fear, but Olivia's gaze softens suddenly, not with threat but with something far more complicated, recognition trying to form without permission, and she speaks again in a voice barely above a whisper asking for the child's full name. Sarah hesitates before answering softly that his name is Noah Mitchell, and the moment the name leaves her lips Olivia reacts as if struck by an unseen force, her expression tightening, her eyes flickering with something between disbelief and pain. She repeats the name under her breath slowly as if testing whether it belongs to memory or imagination, and then her attention drops again to the child's wrist where a faint marking or shape catches the light just enough to shift everything inside her understanding. The sound of a dropped utensil echoes from somewhere behind the counter but no one reacts. Because the entire room is still trapped in this unfolding moment, Olivia's hand trembles slightly as she leans in just enough to confirm what she is seeing, her voice breaking as she asks Sarah where the child was born, and Sarah answers cautiously that it was at a city hospital in Chicago, the response landing like a missing piece sliding into a shape Olivia has been unconsciously holding onto for years. Her posture changes almost imperceptibly as she steps back half a pace, her mind visibly struggling against something she has long buried. James tries once more to intervene but stops when Olivia speaks again, this time not to him but to herself, repeating fragments of thought as if trying to stabilize reality, her eyes never leaving Noah, and Sarah now fully unsettled asks again what is going on, but Olivia does not answer immediately. Instead she stares at the child as though the air between them has become heavier, charged with recognition that refuses to fully surface. Her voice finally returns, quieter now, asking if Sarah has ever been told anything unusual about the child's early days. Sarah shakes her head slowly, tightening her hold again as uncertainty grows, and Olivia exhales sharply, turning her face slightly as if overwhelmed by the weight of what she is beginning to suspect. She steps back another inch, her hand brushing the edge of the table for balance, and the silence that follows is no longer empty but waiting, as if the entire restaurant understands that something irreversible is forming beneath the surface of this moment, something that will not remain contained within these walls. And Olivia's final words break through in a strained whisper asking for confirmation once more of the child's full name and birth details, as if one more piece might finally complete a picture she has been trying not to see, and Sarah answers carefully, unaware that every word is pulling the room closer to a truth no one here is prepared to face. And Olivia's eyes remain fixed on Noah as if the world around her is beginning to tilt slightly off balance, and whatever she realizes next will not stay quiet for long. The air in the restaurant feels heavier now, not from noise but from the absence of it, as Olivia Harper stands motionless in front of Sarah Mitchell and her baby Noah, her eyes locked in a way that suggests she is no longer fully inside the present moment, as if pieces of another life are pressing through the surface of what she is seeing, and Sarah holds her position carefully, her arms firm around the child while her voice remains controlled but cautious as she repeats that Noah was born in Chicago City Hospital and nothing unusual was ever told to her. But Olivia does not react immediately. Instead she slowly shifts her weight backward as if the confirmation has pushed her further into something she is struggling to contain. James Carter steps forward again, this time more urgently, trying to regain control of the situation by asking whether they should clear the dining floor, but Olivia raises her hand once more without even looking at him, stopping him instantly again, her authority still intact but now fractured by something deeply internal. The baby shifts slightly in Sarah's arms and for a brief moment looks toward Olivia again, and that small movement seems to pull her attention back with sudden intensity. Her breathing becomes uneven and she takes a slow step sideways, breaking her direct alignment with Sarah as if she needs space to think, but there is no real space in a room this silent because every person inside is now watching her instead of the child. Olivia's lips part slightly as if she is about to speak but no words come out at first. Only a shallow breath that reveals how unstable her composure has become. Sarah glances around nervously, noticing how every staff member has stopped moving completely. Even the kitchen entrance behind them remains frozen with no sound coming from inside. Olivia finally lowers her hand and slowly looks away from the baby for the first time, her gaze drifting toward the far end of the restaurant where the light reflections on glass and metal surfaces blur together, and she whispers almost unintentionally that it cannot be possible. The words not directed at anyone but at the reality forming inside her mind. James cautiously asks again if she is all right, but Olivia does not respond. Instead she takes another step back and places one hand lightly against the edge of a nearby table as if she needs support to remain steady. Sarah instinctively adjusts her stance, shifting the baby slightly higher as if preparing to leave if necessary, but Olivia suddenly looks back again and her expression has changed completely. The confusion is still there but now it is layered with recognition so sharp it almost looks like pain. She asks Sarah one more time where exactly the child's birth records were processed, and Sarah answers again more carefully this time, saying it was standard hospital procedure with no complications reported, and that answer seems to strike Olivia harder than anything else so far. Her eyes narrow slightly and then soften at the edges as if she is trying to connect two distant points in her memory. The silence stretches so long that even the smallest sound from a distant kitchen timer feels loud. Olivia finally exhales and her voice drops into something quieter, asking if the child has ever had any identifying mark since birth. Sarah hesitates because she has never been asked something like that before, then slowly nods and says there is a small marking on his wrist, and the moment she says it Olivia closes her eyes briefly as if confirming something she has feared or avoided for a long time. When she opens them again she looks directly at Noah and this time her gaze is no longer uncertain but deeply conflicted. She steps forward again, closer than before, ignoring James completely now as he tries to speak but stops mid-sentence when he sees her expression. Sarah instinctively steps half a step back again but Olivia does not react to that movement. Instead she focuses entirely on the child's wrist as if trying to reconcile memory with reality. Her voice becomes almost inaudible as she repeats that marking description under her breath, and the baby makes a soft sound that causes Olivia's entire posture to tighten for a moment before slowly relaxing again. She looks overwhelmed now, not by fear but by recognition she is not ready to accept. Sarah's grip tightens again as she asks quietly if there is a problem she should know about, but Olivia shakes her head slightly as if unable to fully explain yet, and instead she lowers her gaze for a moment as though collecting herself before speaking again, but no words come immediately, only a long silence filled with tension that continues to grow inside the room, and when she finally looks up again at Noah there is something different in her eyes. Something that suggests the situation in the restaurant is no longer about policy, rules, or even control, but about something far older and far more personal than anyone in the room is prepared to understand, and the silence around them begins to feel less like stillness and more like the calm before a realization that cannot be reversed. Olivia stands still for a moment longer, her eyes no longer simply observing Noah but absorbing every detail as if the world around her has collapsed into this single point of focus. And the silence in the restaurant is now so absolute that even the faint hum of the refrigeration units behind the kitchen wall feels distant and unnatural. Sarah remains tense, shifting her weight slightly while keeping the baby close to her chest, her instincts telling her to prepare for something she cannot yet name, while James Carter takes another cautious step forward, his voice now lower as he tries again to regain control of the situation by asking Olivia if she would like the staff to escort Sarah to a private room, but Olivia does not respond to him at all. Instead she slowly lifts her gaze from the child's wrist back to his face and then to Sarah, and for the first time her expression is no longer fragmented by confusion but sharpened by something deeper, something like certainty struggling to surface. She exhales slowly and takes one step closer again, so close now that she is within arm's reach of the child, and Sarah instinctively tightens her hold but does not move away, because Olivia's presence no longer feels like authority but like gravity pulling everything inward. The baby shifts slightly and makes a soft sound, not distress but awareness. And Olivia reacts instantly to that sound as if it confirms something she has been resisting. Her hand rises halfway again, but this time she lets it continue until her fingers hover just inches from the baby's blanket, stopping there as if crossing that final distance requires permission from memory itself. James looks unsettled now, whispering under his breath that this is becoming inappropriate for a public space. But no one listens because the room has shifted completely away from normal procedure into something unspoken and fragile. Olivia finally speaks again, her voice lower than before, asking Sarah if the child has ever shown sensitivity to certain sounds or lights, and Sarah hesitates because the question feels strangely specific, then answers cautiously that he sometimes reacts strongly to loud environments but calms down immediately when held. And as she says that, Olivia closes her eyes briefly as if the answer confirms a connection she had only been circling until now. When she opens them again her focus is no longer divided, it is fully locked on Noah, and she slowly lowers herself further until she is at eye level with him, the entire restaurant watching without movement, even the distant staff behind the service counter frozen mid-task. Olivia's breathing becomes uneven again. But this time not from confusion alone, it is from recognition that carries emotional weight she cannot fully control. She whispers something under her breath that no one fully hears, a name or fragment of a memory that does not belong to the present moment. Sarah shifts slightly backward again, but Olivia does not react to the movement. Instead she gently tilts her head as if searching for confirmation in the child's expression. And Noah looks back at her calmly, completely unafraid, which seems to affect her more than anything else so far. Her eyes begin to glisten faintly as she looks at him longer, and for the first time her authority as the owner of the restaurant is completely absent, replaced by someone standing on the edge of an emotional realization she has avoided for years. James takes another step forward and quietly insists that they should resolve the situation before it disrupts the entire dining floor, but Olivia raises her hand again without looking away from the child, stopping him instantly once more, and Sarah now looks between them with growing uncertainty, realizing this is no longer about permission or rules but something deeply personal she was not prepared to enter. Olivia finally speaks again, her voice barely audible, asking Sarah if anyone ever told her where exactly Noah was placed immediately after birth. And Sarah answers carefully that he stayed in neonatal care for observation for a short period before being discharged normally, and that response seems to hit Olivia like a final missing piece falling into place. Her shoulders tense briefly then slowly relax as if the weight she has been carrying internally has shifted slightly. She leans in just a little closer again, now completely ignoring the room around her, and her eyes soften in a way that no one in the restaurant has ever seen before. James stops speaking altogether, sensing that any interruption would fracture something he does not understand, and the silence expands further, becoming almost unreal, as Olivia stares at Noah with an expression that is no longer confusion but recognition fighting its way through disbelief. And in that moment it becomes clear that what is unfolding is no longer a simple disruption inside a restaurant, but the beginning of something far deeper that will not remain contained within these walls for much longer. Olivia remains lowered at eye level with Noah, her breathing slow but uneven, as if every inhale is carrying weight from somewhere deeper than the restaurant itself, and the silence around her has now become unnatural in its intensity, with no movement from staff, no background conversation, and no sound from the kitchen. Beyond a distant mechanical hum, Sarah stands still but alert, her arms locked protectively around her child, watching Olivia carefully as if trying to anticipate a shift in behavior that has not yet fully revealed itself, while James Carter hovers a few steps behind, visibly uncomfortable, his authority no longer effective in a room that is no longer responding to hierarchy, only to whatever emotional gravity Olivia is currently trapped in. Olivia slowly lifts her gaze from the child's wrist to his face again, and this time her expression is no longer searching but stabilizing, as if something fragmented inside her is finally forming a shape she cannot ignore. She exhales quietly and takes a small step back, breaking the physical closeness for the first time since she approached, and that single movement changes the atmosphere again. Sarah instinctively adjusts her stance, unsure whether to follow or remain still, but Olivia raises her hand slightly, not as a command this time but as a pause, a hesitation directed at herself rather than anyone else. The baby shifts gently and makes a soft sound, and Olivia reacts immediately, not with surprise but with recognition that deepens rather than fades. She closes her eyes for a brief moment, and when she opens them again there is a visible shift in her composure, less fragmented now but more vulnerable. James finally attempts to speak again, carefully suggesting that perhaps they should move this discussion away from the dining area, but Olivia does not respond to him. Instead she turns her head slightly towards Sarah and asks in a quieter voice if the child has ever had any medical complications after birth, and Sarah hesitates, tightening her hold slightly as she answers that Noah has been healthy overall but was kept under observation briefly before leaving the hospital, and that response causes Olivia to pause longer than before, her gaze drifting downward as if she is mentally reconstructing a timeline she has been avoiding for years. The restaurant remains completely silent, with even the smallest ambient sounds feeling amplified in contrast to the stillness at the center of the room. Olivia slowly steps back again, placing more distance between herself and the child, but her eyes never leave him, and her expression now carries something heavier than confusion or recognition. It carries the strain of suppressed memory pushing against boundaries she has built over time. Sarah shifts her weight slightly, her concern growing as she begins to realize that Olivia's reaction is not random but deeply personal, something connected beyond the immediate moment. Olivia finally speaks again, but her voice is softer now, almost restrained, asking Sarah if she has any documents or records from the hospital that confirm the exact time of discharge, and Sarah shakes her head slowly, explaining that she only has basic paperwork stored at home, and that answer causes Olivia to inhale sharply as if the absence of detail itself confirms something she did not want confirmed. James takes a cautious step forward again, lowering his voice as he tries to regain procedural control of the situation, but Olivia raises her hand once more, this time without even looking at him, stopping him completely, and that moment makes it clear to everyone present that authority is no longer functioning in this space. Olivia turns her attention fully back to Noah, and for the first time since this interaction began, she does not speak immediately. Instead she studies him in complete silence, her eyes moving slowly across his features as if mapping something familiar onto something newly present. Sarah notices a subtle change in Olivia's posture, less rigid now, more human, as if something internal has shifted from resistance to acceptance. The baby remains calm, his gaze steady, and Olivia's lips part slightly as if she is about to say something but stops herself again, and that hesitation lingers longer than anything before it. The silence in the restaurant deepens further, becoming almost suffocating in its stillness, and then Olivia finally speaks in a voice barely above a whisper, asking Sarah one last question about whether anyone ever told her the circumstances surrounding the child's first hours after birth, and Sarah hesitates again, sensing the weight behind the question but unable to provide anything beyond what she already knows, and that final uncertainty seems to settle something inside Olivia, her shoulders lowering slightly as she exhales a long controlled breath, her eyes never leaving the child. And in that moment it becomes clear that whatever realization is forming within her is no longer speculative but unavoidable, and the room remains frozen around them as if waiting for her next words to define what this situation has now become. Not a disruption, not a misunderstanding, but something far more significant that is beginning to extend beyond the walls of the restaurant itself. Olivia remains standing in front of Sarah and Noah, but something in her posture has changed completely. The sharp authority she carried at the beginning of this encounter now replaced by a quiet instability that feels more human than managerial. As if every layer of control she once relied on is slowly dissolving under the weight of recognition she cannot fully articulate, the restaurant around them is still frozen in silence, with staff positioned exactly where they were minutes ago, glasses untouched, conversations abandoned mid-breath, and even the ambient lighting seems too still, too aware of what is unfolding in its center. Sarah holds Noah tighter now, her instincts shifting from confusion to caution as she studies Olivia's face, trying to understand whether she is safe or about to become part of something she does not yet recognize. James Carter stands a few feet back, no longer attempting to intervene, his earlier confidence replaced with hesitation as he realizes this situation has moved far beyond standard procedure or authority. Olivia finally breaks her stillness by taking a slow step backward, creating distance again between herself and the child, but her eyes never leave him, as if distance changes nothing about what she is seeing. Her breathing is controlled but uneven, and when she speaks again her voice is softer than before, stripped of command and replaced with something closer to disbelief. She asks Sarah if the child has ever shown unusual reactions to certain environments, specifically quiet or controlled spaces, and Sarah hesitates, unsure why this detail matters, then answers cautiously that Noah tends to remain unusually calm in structured environments but becomes unsettled in chaotic ones, and that response causes Olivia to pause again, her eyes lowering briefly as if each answer is locking another piece into place inside her mind. The silence deepens further, becoming almost physical, and Olivia slowly brings a hand to her chest as if grounding herself, then exhales in a way that suggests she is holding back something far larger than the room can contain. James attempts once more to restore order, suggesting they move to a private office to continue the conversation, but Olivia does not acknowledge him, her attention fully consumed by the child. She takes another step forward again, closing the distance slightly but not fully, as if testing the boundary between certainty and fear. Sarah instinctively adjusts her stance again, her body language protective but no longer aggressive, more uncertain than defensive. Olivia's gaze drops once more to Noah's wrist, lingering there longer than before, and her expression tightens subtly as if she is connecting something she has avoided acknowledging for years, a memory not fully formed but emotionally intact. The baby shifts gently in Sarah's arms and makes a soft sound, and Olivia reacts instantly to it, her eyes softening in a way that contrasts sharply with her earlier rigidity. She closes her eyes briefly, and when she opens them again there is a noticeable shift, less fragmented now, more grounded, but also more vulnerable. She looks at Sarah directly for the first time in several moments and asks in a quiet voice if anyone has ever mentioned the exact time Noah first responded after birth. Sarah shakes her head slowly, explaining that she was told he was healthy and responsive within normal medical expectations, and that answer causes Olivia to still completely, her body going motionless for a moment as if that detail confirms something she has been trying not to fully accept. The restaurant remains silent, but the weight of that silence feels different now. Less like observation and more like anticipation. Olivia steps back again, this time placing more physical distance between herself and the child, but her eyes remain fixed with unwavering focus. Her voice lowers further as she asks whether Sarah ever saw any identifying detail noted in his early medical records, and Sarah hesitates again, clearly unsettled by the specificity of these questions, answering that she only received standard discharge documentation with no unusual notes. And that final response seems to settle something inside Olivia, her shoulders lowering slightly as her breathing slows, but her eyes do not soften, they sharpen instead with the intensity of recognition that is no longer speculative. She looks at Noah for several seconds without speaking, as if confirming something she already knows but cannot yet say aloud, and James finally stops trying to intervene altogether, sensing that anything spoken now would fracture a moment that is already dangerously fragile. Olivia's lips part slightly as if she is about to reveal something, but no words come, only a long controlled silence that stretches across the entire room, and in that silence it becomes clear that what is unfolding is no longer about a misunderstanding or coincidence, but about a connection that has been waiting beneath the surface of time, slowly rising into reality in a way that cannot be reversed. Olivia stands completely still for a long moment, her gaze locked on Noah as if the rest of the restaurant no longer exists, the silence around her growing heavier with every passing second, not because nothing is happening, but because something irreversible is forming beneath the surface of her expression, Sarah remains tense but steady, adjusting her grip on the baby slightly as she watches. Olivia carefully, sensing that whatever is unfolding now is no longer about policy, misunderstanding, or coincidence, while James Carter stands at a distance with his hands lowered, no longer attempting to interrupt because even he can feel that authority has no function in this moment. Olivia finally exhales a long controlled breath and slowly straightens her posture, stepping back half a pace as if trying to regain physical distance from the emotional weight pressing into her, but her eyes never leave Noah, and when she speaks again her voice is no longer uncertain, it is quiet but deliberate, carrying a tone that feels like suppressed truth finally reaching the surface. She asks Sarah if the child has ever been registered under any alternative name at birth or during hospital intake, and Sarah immediately shakes her head, confused by the question, explaining that everything was processed under standard documentation under the name Noah Mitchell with no exceptions or unusual entries, and that answer causes Olivia to pause completely, her expression tightening for a brief moment as if something inside her has just aligned too precisely to ignore. The restaurant remains frozen in complete silence, the staff still unable to move or speak, as though the entire space is holding its breath alongside her. Olivia slowly turns her head slightly away from the child, not breaking focus but shifting into thought, and when she speaks again it is softer, almost fragmented. Asking if Sarah has ever noticed anything unusual about how quickly Noah responds to her voice compared to others. Sarah hesitates, glancing down at the baby, then answers carefully that he has always reacted more strongly to familiar voices, calming almost instantly when held or spoken to directly, and that response causes Olivia to close her eyes for a brief moment as if absorbing something that confirms a long-buried suspicion. When she opens them again there is a subtle but undeniable change in her demeanor, less defensive, more internal, as if she is now navigating between memory and present reality. James takes a cautious step forward and suggests again that they move to a private space to avoid disruption, but Olivia immediately raises her hand without looking at him, stopping him instantly, and this time there is no authority in the gesture, only necessity. Sarah shifts her stance again, her body instinctively protective, unsure whether to retreat or remain, while Olivia takes another slow step forward, closing the distance slightly, her eyes returning to the child's wrist with renewed intensity, lingering there longer than before as if tracing something invisible that connects past and present. The baby makes a soft sound and Olivia reacts immediately, her expression softening in a way that contrasts sharply with her earlier rigidity. She lowers her gaze briefly and exhales, and when she speaks again her voice carries a tremor that she does not fully control, asking Sarah if she has ever been told anything about the first moments immediately after Noah's delivery. Sarah hesitates again, clearly unsettled now, and answers that she was only informed that the birth was uncomplicated and that Noah was stable from the beginning with no additional details provided, and that final answer seems to settle something deep within Olivia, her shoulders lowering slightly as if a weight has shifted, but her eyes remain fixed on the child with an intensity that no longer feels uncertain. It feels resolved in a way she has not yet fully admitted. She steps back again slowly, placing more distance between herself and Sarah, but her gaze does not waver, and the silence in the restaurant begins to feel different now, no longer waiting but anticipating, as if the space itself understands that a truth is approaching its final threshold. Olivia's lips part slightly as though she is about to speak something definitive, but she stops again, holding the words back, and in that restraint there is more clarity than confusion, because what is forming inside her is no longer just recognition, it is confirmation of something she has avoided acknowledging for far too long. And the entire room remains suspended in that fragile stillness, where even the smallest movement could decide the direction of everything that follows. Olivia stands in complete stillness for several seconds, her eyes fixed on Noah as if the entire restaurant has collapsed into a single point of focus between them, and the silence around her is no longer passive but charged, as though every person in the room understands they are witnessing something that cannot be reversed once spoken aloud. Sarah remains tense but steady, shifting her weight slightly while keeping the baby close, her instincts telling her that the situation has moved beyond confusion into something she cannot define, while James Carter stands frozen near the edge of the dining area, no longer attempting to assert control because even he can sense that authority has lost its meaning here. Olivia slowly exhales and lowers her gaze again to the child's wrist, her expression tightening for a moment before softening in a way that suggests recognition is no longer forming but completing. She takes one step back, then another. Not out of retreat but as if she is trying to create space to process something overwhelming, and when she speaks again her voice is quieter than before, stripped of command and replaced with something that feels almost fragile. She asks Sarah if the child has ever shown any unusual response to names, particularly unfamiliar ones, and Sarah hesitates, confused by the specificity, then answers carefully that Noah usually reacts only to voices he recognizes and tends to ignore strangers unless held or comforted. And that response causes Olivia to pause again, her breathing slowing as her eyes briefly close, as if the answer has confirmed something she has been circling for far too long. When she opens them again there is a subtle but undeniable shift in her demeanor, no longer fragmented between doubt and memory, but anchored in something heavier that she is not yet willing to name aloud. James finally takes a cautious step forward and quietly suggests again that they move the discussion into a private office, but Olivia immediately raises her hand without turning toward him, stopping him completely. And this time the gesture carries no authority, only finality. Sarah instinctively adjusts her hold on the baby, her body language shifting between protection and uncertainty as she watches Olivia carefully. While Olivia steps forward again, closing the distance slightly, her focus returning to Noah with a precision that feels almost surgical in its intensity. She looks at his face, then his wrist again, as if aligning two separate pieces of a memory that refuse to stay apart. The baby makes a soft sound and Olivia reacts instantly, her expression tightening briefly before softening again in a way that suggests emotional conflict rather than confusion. She lowers her gaze and exhales slowly, and when she speaks again her voice is quieter still, asking Sarah if anyone ever told her about the exact condition of the child immediately after delivery. Sarah hesitates longer this time, sensing the weight behind the question, then answers that she was only told Noah was healthy and stable with no complications and that everything proceeded normally. And that answer seems to settle something deep within Olivia, her shoulders lowering slightly as if a long-held tension has finally shifted, but her eyes remain fixed on the child with unwavering focus, and for the first time there is something final forming in her expression, not uncertainty but alignment, as if fragmented memories are locking into place one by one. She takes another step back, placing more distance between herself and Sarah, but never breaking eye contact with Noah, and the silence in the restaurant feels different now, no longer suspended but expectant, as though the entire room is waiting for a truth that has already begun to surface. Olivia's lips part slightly as if she is about to speak, but she stops again, holding the words inside her chest, and in that restraint there is more certainty than hesitation, because what is forming within her is no longer question or doubt, but recognition that has crossed the threshold into inevitability, and the entire space remains locked in that fragile stillness, where even the smallest movement feels like it could decide what comes next. Olivia stands motionless for a moment that feels longer than everything that came before it, her gaze locked on Noah with an intensity that no longer carries confusion but something far more dangerous to her internal stability, recognition that has finally stopped resisting its own formation. And the silence inside the restaurant deepens further as if the entire space is now holding itself together around this single point of emotional gravity. Sarah remains still but alert, her arms tightening slightly around the baby as she senses the shift in Olivia's presence, no longer uncertain but collapsing inward like pressure finding its final point of release, while James Carter stands frozen near the edge of the dining floor, his earlier attempts to regain control completely abandoned because even he understands that what is happening now is beyond procedure, beyond authority, and beyond explanation that fits within normal expectations. Olivia slowly lowers her gaze again to Noah's wrist, and this time she does not pull away, she studies it with unwavering focus, as if confirming something she has already accepted internally but has not yet allowed herself to voice. Her breathing becomes slow and controlled, but there is a visible strain in her posture, like she is balancing between recognition and denial that no longer hold equal weight. She takes one step back, then another, not out of retreat but out of necessity, as if she needs distance from the child in order to fully process what proximity is revealing, and when she finally speaks her voice is quieter than before, stripped of all command and replaced with something that sounds almost exposed. She asks Sarah if the child was ever separated from medical supervision at any point during the first hours after birth, and Sarah hesitates, clearly unsettled by the precision of the question, then answers carefully that Noah remained under standard observation before being released with no complications or special conditions, and that answer causes Olivia to close her eyes for a longer moment than before, as if each piece of information is now aligning with something she has been carrying for years without context. When she opens them again, there is no longer fragmentation in her expression, only a deep internal stillness that feels heavier than confusion. James finally attempts once more to speak, suggesting that they should move the discussion away from the dining area entirely, but Olivia raises her hand without looking at him, stopping him instantly again, and this time the gesture feels less like authority and more like final separation from anything external. Sarah adjusts her stance slightly, her body protective but no longer reactive, because Olivia's behavior has shifted into something she cannot categorize as threat or comfort, only emotional rupture. Olivia takes another slow step forward, then stops, now positioned at a distance where she can see both Sarah and Noah clearly without moving closer, and her eyes remain fixed on the child's face for several seconds without blinking, as if studying a truth she once knew but had buried under time and silence. The baby shifts slightly and makes a soft sound, and Olivia responds immediately with a subtle tightening in her expression, not fear but recognition sharpening into certainty. She exhales slowly and looks down again at the wrist marking, her hand rising halfway before stopping as if she is afraid that contact would collapse the fragile structure of understanding forming inside her, and when she speaks again her voice is almost indistinguishable from a whisper, asking Sarah if anyone ever mentioned a delay or irregularity in documentation during discharge. Sarah shakes her head slowly, explaining that everything was processed normally without mention of any exceptions, and that final answer causes Olivia to become completely still. Her shoulders lowering slightly as if something inside her has finally settled into place after resisting for too long, but her eyes remain locked on Noah with an expression that now carries certainty rather than doubt, and in that certainty there is something irreversible beginning to surface. She takes one more step back, placing greater distance between herself and the child, but her gaze never breaks, and the silence in the restaurant shifts again, no longer suspended or expectant but deeply charged, as if the room itself understands that what is about to be spoken will redefine everything that has happened so far. Olivia's lips part slightly, but she does not speak yet, holding the words in a controlled pause that feels heavier than sound, and in that pause there is a clear realization forming within her that can no longer be dismissed or delayed, because what she is seeing is no longer a possibility, it is confirmation that has been waiting beneath years of silence to finally surface. Olivia stands still for a long moment, her gaze locked on Noah with an intensity that no longer resembles uncertainty but something far more final, as if every fragment of doubt she carried has been pushed aside by a truth she can no longer avoid, and the silence inside the restaurant feels heavier now, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is happening at once beneath the surface of stillness. Sarah remains tense but composed, her arms tightening slightly around the baby as she senses the emotional shift in Olivia's posture, no longer fragmented or searching, but increasingly aligned with something internal that is now pushing toward recognition. While James Carter stands near the edge of the dining floor completely still, no longer attempting to assert authority because he understands that authority has already collapsed in the presence of whatever is unfolding. Olivia slowly exhales and takes one step back, then another, placing greater physical distance between herself and Sarah, but her eyes never leave Noah, and when she finally speaks again her voice is lower than before, controlled but carrying a weight that suggests certainty rather than confusion. She asks Sarah if there was ever any delay in the release process after birth, any moment where the child was held longer than standard procedure, and Sarah hesitates, clearly unsettled by the precision of the question, then answers carefully that Noah remained under routine observation only and was discharged without exception or irregular timing, and that response causes Olivia to become completely still, her shoulders lowering slightly as if something inside her has just aligned too perfectly to ignore. The silence in the restaurant tightens again, stretching across every corner of the room, and even the smallest sound feels distant and removed from this moment. Olivia slowly looks down again at the child's wrist, her expression no longer shifting between doubt and recognition but settling into something far more defined, as if she is now confirming rather than searching. James finally takes a cautious step forward and suggests once again that they move to a private office to avoid further disruption, but Olivia immediately raises her hand without turning toward him, stopping him instantly. And this time there is no hesitation in the gesture, only finality. Sarah instinctively adjusts her stance, her body language protective but now tempered by uncertainty rather than resistance, because Olivia's behavior is no longer unpredictable but deeply internal, as if she is moving through a realization that exists entirely within her own memory. Olivia takes another slow step forward, closing the distance slightly again, then stops, positioning herself where she can see Noah clearly without intruding further. Her breathing becomes measured but heavier, and her eyes remain fixed on the child's face for several seconds without blinking, as if studying a truth she has carried unknowingly for years. The baby shifts slightly and makes a soft sound, and Olivia reacts immediately, her expression tightening for a brief moment before softening again in a way that suggests recognition has fully replaced confusion. She exhales slowly and lowers her gaze once more to the wrist marking, her hand rising halfway before stopping again as if she is afraid that even a small action could break the fragile clarity forming inside her, and when she speaks again her voice is almost a whisper, asking Sarah if there was any unusual notation in the hospital records at all, anything that might have been left undocumented or verbally communicated instead of written, and Sarah shakes her head slowly, explaining that everything was standard with no additional notes or verbal instructions beyond routine care. And that final response causes Olivia to close her eyes for a longer moment than before, as if absorbing the last missing piece of something she has been circling for years. When she opens them again there is no longer fragmentation in her expression, only stillness that carries the weight of certainty. She steps back once more, placing a clear distance between herself and the child, but her gaze never wavers, and the silence in the restaurant shifts again, no longer suspended or expectant, but charged with inevitability, as if the room itself understands that what is forming now is no longer speculation but confirmation that cannot be reversed. Olivia's lips part slightly, but she does not speak yet, holding the words as though they are too heavy to release, and in that silence there is a complete transformation taking shape, because what she is seeing is no longer a coincidence, no longer a possibility, but something that has been waiting beneath years of silence to finally be acknowledged. Olivia stands completely still for a moment that feels heavier than anything that has happened before it, her eyes locked on Noah with an expression that is no longer uncertain or searching but fully suspended between realization and acceptance, as if the final structure of truth has already formed inside her mind but has not yet been allowed to escape into words. The restaurant around them remains frozen in unnatural silence, every table, every staff member, every flickering reflection on glass and metal surfaces trapped in the same moment that refuses to move forward. Sarah holds Noah tighter now, her instincts sharpened by the shift in Olivia's presence, no longer fragmented but deeply focused, and James Carter stands motionless near the edge of the dining area, no longer attempting to intervene because the entire hierarchy he once controlled has dissolved into something he cannot define. Olivia slowly exhales, her shoulders lowering slightly as if a long internal resistance has finally given way, and when she speaks again her voice is different from anything before it, not uncertain, not investigative, but quiet and deeply controlled. Carrying the weight of something she has carried alone for far too long, she takes a slow step forward again, closing the distance slightly but not fully, as if even proximity now carries consequences she is trying to measure carefully, and she asks Sarah a question that changes the texture of the entire room, her voice asking whether there was ever any moment during the child's earliest hours where she was told to wait outside a room, or to step away while doctors handled something privately, and Sarah hesitates immediately, her expression tightening with confusion at the specificity, then answers carefully that there was a brief moment after delivery when she was asked to remain outside the recovery area while standard checks were completed, and that answer causes Olivia to close her eyes for a long moment, longer than any pause before it, as if that detail has finally connected the last remaining point inside a memory she has avoided confronting. When she opens her eyes again, there is no longer fragmentation in her expression, only stillness, not calm but resolution forming under immense pressure. James finally steps forward again, his voice cautious as he suggests once more that this should be moved to a private office where they can speak properly, but Olivia immediately raises her hand without looking at him, stopping him instantly, and this time the gesture carries no authority, only finality. Sarah shifts slightly, her body language protective but uncertain, because Olivia's behavior has fully transitioned into something internal and irreversible, as if she is no longer reacting to the present but responding to something buried deeply in time. Olivia takes another step back, placing distance between herself and the child again, but her eyes never leave Noah, and the way she is looking at him now is no longer observational, it is confirmatory, as if every detail she is seeing aligns perfectly with something already known but never spoken. The baby makes a small sound and Olivia reacts instantly, her expression tightening briefly before softening again in a way that suggests recognition has fully overtaken doubt. She lowers her gaze to the child's wrist once more, her hand rising halfway before stopping as if even contact would collapse the fragile structure of understanding forming inside her, and when she speaks again her voice is barely above a whisper, asking Sarah if anyone ever mentioned anything unusual about the child's early identification records or whether there was ever any correction made after initial registration, and Sarah shakes her head slowly, explaining that everything was standard with no corrections, no revisions, and no unusual entries, and that final answer causes Olivia to become completely still, her shoulders lowering slightly as if something inside her has finally settled into a single unavoidable truth. The silence in the restaurant shifts again, no longer suspended or expectant but deeply charged with inevitability, as if every person present understands that what is forming now is no longer uncertainty but confirmation. Olivia steps back once more, creating a clear distance between herself and Sarah, but her gaze remains locked on Noah with unwavering intensity, and for several seconds she does not speak, she simply stands there holding a truth that has finally reached completion inside her. And in that silence it becomes clear that what is unfolding is no longer about questions or investigation, but about recognition that cannot be reversed. As the entire room remains trapped in the moment just before something long buried is finally spoken aloud, Olivia stands completely still for a long moment, her gaze locked on Noah with an expression that no longer carries uncertainty but something far more irreversible, as if every fragmented question she has been carrying has finally converged into a single answer she cannot unsee. And the silence in the restaurant feels heavier than before, not empty but saturated, as though the entire space is holding its breath in anticipation of what she is about to acknowledge. Sarah remains tense but steady, her arms tightening slightly around the baby as she watches Olivia carefully, sensing that whatever is unfolding now is no longer about confusion or investigation but about recognition reaching its final stage, while James Carter stands frozen near the edge of the dining floor, no longer attempting to regain control because he understands that control has already collapsed into something far beyond his role. Olivia slowly exhales, her shoulders lowering in a subtle but decisive way, and when she speaks again her voice is quieter than anything she has said before, stripped of authority and replaced with something deeply internal. She takes a small step forward, then stops, as if even movement now carries emotional weight she must measure carefully, and she asks Sarah a question that changes the entire temperature of the room. Her voice asking whether there was ever any moment immediately after birth where someone from medical staff referred to the child by a different identifier or temporary designation before final records were confirmed. Sarah hesitates immediately, confused by the precision of the question, then answers carefully that she was only told a temporary identification number was used during initial processing before Noah's name was finalized in the system, and that response causes Olivia to close her eyes for a longer moment than before, as if that single detail has finally aligned the last remaining fragment of something she has been trying not to face. When she opens them again there is no longer instability in her expression, only stillness that carries the weight of final recognition. James takes a cautious step forward again and suggests once more that they move the conversation to a private office, but Olivia immediately raises her hand without turning toward him, stopping him instantly, and this time the gesture is not defensive or authoritative but absolute, as if nothing outside this moment has any relevance anymore. Sarah shifts slightly, her protective stance softening into uncertainty. Because Olivia's behavior has fully transitioned into something internal and irreversible, Olivia takes another slow step back, placing more distance between herself and the child, but her eyes remain locked on Noah without interruption, and the way she is looking at him now is no longer analytical or searching, it is confirmatory. As if every detail she sees fits perfectly into a truth she has already accepted deep inside. The baby makes a small sound and Olivia reacts instantly, her expression tightening for a brief moment before softening again in a way that suggests emotional resolution breaking through resistance. She lowers her gaze once more to the child's wrist, her hand rising halfway before stopping as if contact would collapse the fragile structure of understanding she has just reached, and when she speaks again her voice is barely above a whisper, asking Sarah if there was any mention at all during discharge about exceptional observation protocols or non-standard verification procedures applied to the child after birth, and Sarah shakes her head slowly, explaining that everything was described as routine with no exceptional procedures or additional notes, and that final answer causes Olivia to become completely motionless, her shoulders lowering slightly as if something inside her has finally settled into a single unavoidable conclusion. The silence in the restaurant shifts again, no longer suspended or expectant but charged with inevitability, as if every person present understands that what is forming now is not speculation but confirmation reaching its final stage. Olivia steps back once more, creating clear distance between herself and Sarah, but her gaze never leaves Noah, and for several seconds she does not speak. She simply stands there holding a truth that has finally completed its formation inside her, and in that silence it becomes clear that what is unfolding is no longer about questions or uncertainty, but about recognition that has crossed the point of no return. As the entire room remains trapped in the moment just before something long buried is finally acknowledged without hesitation, Olivia stands in complete stillness for a moment that feels like the final breath before a long-held truth is released, her gaze fixed on Noah with an expression that is no longer uncertain, no longer searching, but fully resolved in a way that makes the entire room feel smaller, as if everything inside the restaurant has been compressed into this single point of emotional clarity. Sarah remains tense but steady, her arms still wrapped protectively around the baby, watching Olivia carefully because something in her posture has shifted beyond confusion into acceptance that carries weight. She has not yet spoken aloud, while James Carter stands frozen near the edge of the dining floor, no longer attempting to intervene because he understands that whatever authority he thought he had no longer applies in this space. Olivia slowly exhales, her shoulders lowering as if a long internal resistance has finally collapsed into understanding, and when she speaks again her voice is softer than anything she has used before, stripped of control and replaced with something deeply human. She takes a slow step forward, then stops, and the entire restaurant seems to lean into her silence as if waiting for a single word to define what comes next. She looks at Noah for several seconds without blinking, then lowers her gaze briefly to his wrist before speaking again, asking Sarah if there was ever any final confirmation at discharge that the child's identity had been fully verified through hospital administration before release, and Sarah hesitates, clearly unsettled by the precision of the question, then answers carefully that she was told all standard verification procedures were completed before she was allowed to take Noah home, and that response causes Olivia to become completely still, her expression tightening for a fraction of a second before softening into something final, something that no longer questions but accepts. The silence in the restaurant deepens further, becoming almost physical, as if every person inside understands they are witnessing the end of uncertainty. James takes one cautious step forward again, attempting to suggest that they move to a private office, but Olivia immediately raises her hand without turning toward him, stopping him instantly, and this time the gesture carries no hesitation, no authority, only completion. Sarah shifts slightly, her protective stance still present but now softened by confusion as she realizes that Olivia is no longer reacting outwardly but turning entirely inward. Olivia takes one slow step back, placing clear distance between herself and Sarah, but her eyes never leave Noah, and when she finally speaks again her voice is almost inaudible, not because she is uncertain, but because the weight of what she is acknowledging no longer requires volume. She says the child's name softly as if confirming it against memory rather than asking a question, and in that moment her expression changes completely, not into shock, not into surprise, but into recognition that carries emotional permanence. Sarah watches her closely, now realizing that this is not a confrontation but a revelation unfolding in real time. The baby shifts slightly and makes a small sound, and Olivia reacts immediately, her gaze tightening for a brief moment before softening again, as if every detail about the child now aligns with something she has been carrying silently for years. She lowers her eyes once more to the wrist marking, her hand rising halfway before stopping again as though even the thought of contact would make the truth too real to contain, and when she speaks again her voice is steady but fragile, asking Sarah if there was ever any moment after discharge where she was told to return for additional verification or follow-up observation, and Sarah shakes her head slowly, explaining that nothing beyond standard paperwork was ever required, and that final answer causes Olivia to close her eyes for a long moment, longer than any before it, as if everything she has been holding together internally has finally aligned into one unavoidable truth. When she opens them again there is no fragmentation left, only clarity that feels heavier than doubt ever was. She takes another step back, increasing the distance between herself and the child, but her gaze remains fixed with unwavering certainty. And the silence in the restaurant shifts once more, no longer suspended or expectant but absolute, as if the entire room now understands that what has been forming has reached its final point. Olivia does not speak immediately, she simply stands there holding the weight of recognition that has finally completed itself, and in that stillness it becomes clear that what is happening is no longer a question waiting for an answer, but a truth that has already been accepted in silence long before it was ever spoken.